Welcome to this episode of Safety Bytes with myself, Justin Long, and James Junkin. Today we're joined by a special guest, Mr. Mike Borschatz. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Estvold Oilfield Services, and he's the Vice Chair of the Safeland USA Board of Directors. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, doing good.
Mike, it's so good to have you on this episode of Safety Bytes. Mike is the Chief Operating Officer, like Justin said, of Estvold Oilfield Services. They're a prime oilfield and oil and gas contractor in North Dakota with operations also in Montana. There is no one I've met in the oil and gas industry more committed to getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs. So I'm really excited about having Mike because he brings the operational aspect, the people that go out there that are exposed to the hazards, that do the work, that get the energy to our home. So I'm really excited about having Mike and listen to some of his viewpoints as we spend a little bit of time together on this episode.
Today we got a pretty special topic. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation through it all. Today we're going to discuss developing relationships between the hiring client and the contractor, and the dynamic between that and some of the challenges.
Absolutely. You know, as a safety professional, all of us want our workers to come home safe, and there's always a gradient between getting the work done and getting the work done safely. And anyone that's had any experience, particularly in the oil and gas industry, understands that dynamic can be challenging within an individual organization, but even more so when we're trying to meet the expectations of hiring clients. So, Mike, I'd really just like the three of us to have a discussion about how you go about overcoming some of the challenges of working for hiring clients and maintaining your responsibility to bring people home safe, as well as meet their expectations, and just sort of have a conversation maybe of some past instances where you've been challenged or where there have been opportunities for improvement. So just tell us a little bit about your experiences with dealing with hiring clients.
Yeah, well, I can tell you it's gotten a lot better than it was when I started back in 2012. Really, it has to do with you understanding, right, that your people are the most important part of your business. You can have all the best equipment, all the best trucks, decked out, all the bells and whistles. But if you don't have guys to drive them trucks or to run that equipment, you've got nothing. So in order to develop long-lasting relationships with your customers, you need to make sure that they understand that your people come first.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. And from a safety side, many times we get frustrated with our team. We're like, if my guys would only do this, if they'd only quit making mistakes, if they had only follow the rules, as if work is linear and it always goes as planned. And sometimes we forget that our employees are our greatest asset. That's how work gets done. That's how innovation takes place. And there's kind of a revolution going on in occupational safety and health right now, sort of the new view of safety, where we don't see workers as a problem to be fixed, but workers as an asset that can help us build a dynamic safety management system with barriers and defenses that when things go wrong, they don't end up in catastrophe.
Well, to follow up that point, when we do have an incident, right, or an issue that we need help resolving, yes, our safety team is vital in putting the information together and getting the groups together to come up with a resolution, right? But it's often the guys in the field that figure out a way to solve the problem.
I agree with that. I like to say this, and I hate to repeat myself, but If you want to know where your next accident is, go talk to the people that actually do the work, the ones that face the hazards every day. They'll tell you when the PPE is insufficient. They'll tell you when the work instructions are vague. They'll tell you when they have to bend some of the rules to actually get the job done, because if we followed all the safety rules in this particular instance, we couldn't accomplish the work. And you and I were talking about some of those instances last week. So let's kind of go back maybe to an incident or to a situation when we're dealing with a hiring client, because some hiring clients want to direct the work. They want to tell you everything that you need to do. They give you an instruction manual and they say, don't deviate from it. And some hiring clients hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, so to speak. They said, that's why we hired you as a contractor to do the work. And that can create friction when your team works for multiple hiring clients. So how do you deal with that situation?
Well, really, a lot of it has to do with stability, right? So try not to move your crews if you can between different hiring clients. Now, that's not always easy, and we do have crews that do go from a client to a client. The biggest thing is making sure that your policies, right, are the most stringent. So if that way, when your employees are following your policies, it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, you know that they're going to follow the most stringent ones. So
You got it covered.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And many times what I find when I work, I work with multiple contractors, is the most often repeated phrase is, but my operator / hiring client didn't tell me to do this. My operator / hiring client didn't tell me. They didn't inform me I needed to train all my people in particular OSHA regulations. For example, I've gone out and seen many people wearing respirators. They have no idea about respiratory protection or respiratory training. They just know that they needed a respirator. And they say, well, our hiring client didn't tell us that we needed to train our people on respiratory protection. And I think the misnomer is that the hiring client is our safety mom and dad. The hiring client's not our safety mom and dad. And I appreciate you coming on here because you get it. We are responsible for our employees. And the hiring client's not designed to run our safety department. So many times when, from a legal aspect, they hire contractors to transfer liability. So they're not going to tell you everything that you need to do or run your safety department for you. And it's good to see companies like yourself and leaders like yourself taking ownership and having your own company specific policies, knowing what your procedure is, knowing what your policies are, and comparing those to the hiring client and going with a more stricter standard. So knowing that, I imagine sometimes in your career, being more strict creates maybe a slowdown a little bit in production. How do you get to deal with that when you're dealing with a hiring client or an operator company man that says, look, this is how we do it. This is what we want to do. I know your policy says that, but we got to get this job done X, Y, Z, and it's safe to do it our way as well. We want you to adopt this and move forward. How do you deal with the different policies or the different standards, the more strict or stricter requirements that you may have adopted?
Well, really, it's a combination of a few things, right? So, but if we always tend to go with the most stricter policy, right, or procedure. But in the cases where you're getting that pushback, right, you got to have the conversation with the client, and it has to be over the worker level, right? So our guys are instructed that if somebody wants to do something that isn't in our realm, right, of how we do it. We need to call your frontline supervisor, right? Frontline supervisor will look at the situation, and sometimes the frontline supervisor just tells the client that we're just not going to do the job, right? If that's the way you want to do it, we'll just pack our stuff up and go home. If it's a comparable, maybe pretty close policy difference, will involve the safety department. They'll get me on the phone, right? We'll have a conversation, and if we're close, then I think we can talk with both sides and come up with the best way possible, right? So there is some give and take there, but at the end of the day, you can't be afraid to say, we're not going to do this job, call somebody else, we're going to go home.
And that does have a tendency to cause a rift. When somebody speaks up, it does have a tendency to cause a rift. Being realistic. I mean, if we're just going to be truthful about it, that sometimes you'll damage a relationship by just saying, we can't do it that way, or even just questioning the way they're doing it and saying, well, our policy shows this, and here's why we feel like this is a safer method. A lot of times they'll think you're challenging them on it. So you're right. Developing that strong relationship and getting them to where they know you and know your intentions, it makes a big difference.
So I got a call one time from a guy that I taught in a Veriforce train-the-trainer, and he is out in Colorado. They were digging an excavation. Their monitors, H2S monitors, 4-gas monitors, were set to alarm at 10 parts per million, which is sort of an industry standard in the way that these things come from the factory calibrated. But they're in an excavation, and their alarms are going off. And of course, what do we tell people, Justin, when their alarms go off? What do we tell them to do?
You bet. Leave the area.
Evacuate the area, right?
The area.
So they're going down into the excavation. Their alarms are going off. They're coming back out. The job shut down. And the company man, the operator representative for this job, comes out and he says, OSHA says you can work in 20 parts per million H2S. You get your guys back down in there, or I'm going to find someone who will. So this created a lot of confusion. As soon as he said the word OSHA says, caused a lot of confusion. So they get me on the phone. They say, what do we do? I have the contractor safety person on the phone and the president of their company. And he says, I don't want to get anybody hurt, but he's saying OSHA says we can work in 20 parts per million. And I said, first of all, he's wrong on that. In the general industry standard, 1910-1000, the Z table, there is no permissible exposure limit. There's an ACC, an accepted sealing concentration of 20 parts per million, but that's not the PEL. But in the construction standard, which ought to tell you something about OSHA, there is a PEL. And excavation is a construction standard regulation, right? And in the Z tables for construction, the PEL for H2S is 10 parts per million. It is 10 parts per million. And this is something that could have been discussed in the planning stages of the work. And I want to say, really, this is academic, because if you put your guys down in there and they're exposed all day to 10 parts per million, they're not going to die. Potentially, they're going to have headaches, nausea, vomiting, all those different, perhaps diarrhea, starting to have adverse health effects that may make them feel like that they want to die, but they're not going to die, but they're certainly going to be sick, and everybody's going to quit. So what we need to do is figure out what to do with the H2S. And we got on the same page. But all of that could have been avoided by having a conversation in the planning stage of the work. Because sometimes when we're in the heat of battle, it's too late to be figuring out what regulations we're going to follow, what policies we're going to follow, that type of thing. Normally, what I recommend is go ahead at the beginning when you become a contractor. Most people are just so happy to become a contractor for a hiring client and to be awarded work. They don't read the MSA, but go ahead and have a bridging document between what our policies are and what their policies are. That way we're all on the same page. But I want to shift focus just for a minute. Normally this comes up not in the awarding of the work, but post-incident. And anybody that's been a safety professional for any length of time has had someone get injured, had a near miss, God forbid, a serious injury or fatality on a job site. And at that point, in every industry I've worked in, whether it's oil and gas, construction, manufacturing, union, non-union, onshore, offshore, chemical processing plants, midstream, upstream, downstream, it doesn't matter. The very first thing we're going to get as a requirement is an incident investigation. Now, I just want to hear how you go about and your feelings about conducting incident investigations, dealing with sometimes pressure from hiring clients to get it done quickly, because that's pretty common my experience, and how you go about your philosophies of incident investigation.
Right. So we've experienced the same thing, right? And at the beginning of every incident, the first reports that come out, right, that send up all the red flags and all the alarms, sound all the alarms. The very first reports are usually inaccurate, right? So you have to combat that first and get everybody just to take a deep breath. Let me get on the phone, or I'm on my way to the location. Let me make sure my guy's okay, right? Let me make sure that they're don't need to go to the hospital or whatever, right? And then as it progresses through the steps, you have to be very, very what do I want to say here? Proactive, right? You don't wait for them to say, we want an incident investigation. You start your incident investigation immediately, right? As soon as, if there's an injured party or whatever, as soon as they're being treated or whatever, you're starting your investigation. You're talking to gathering witness statements, pictures, what kind of documentation do they have? Do they have a good, their JSA, hot work permit, lockout, tagout, confined space permit, involves, mechanical lifting. Do they have a lift plan? And you have to gather all of that information. And then in the process of gathering that information, your hiring client is going to call you and say, how soon are we going to know anything? And this is when you simply tell them, look, employee X got treated from the hospital. Here's what we know. He's in pretty good shape, banged up a little bit, whatever the case is, right? Give them the report on the employee first, okay? And then follow that up with, we have begun our investigation. And depending on the complexity, you can say, we will have something to you in, if it's a small incident, a day, maybe 2. If it's a larger incident, it could be a week, right? But we will keep you updated as we go. We're not going to leave you in the dark, and then constantly give them updates on the employee.
It's
I think
easy.
that's good advice.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Justin.
It's easy to gather the misconception that that hiring clients bringing the hammer down on you when they're asking you what's going on. You being experienced, Mike, what they mean when they say what's happening out there. When are we going to know something? You and I both know what they're saying is, what can you tell me? And when does it look like we'll have more information? They're just wanting to be able to answer questions from their chain of command or their higher ups or wherever it's coming from. I find most of them are pretty understanding. If you say, here's what we know, here's our condition, like you said, our condition, here's what we know, and incidents ongoing, we'll keep you posted every step of the way. And they're pretty understanding.
Because trust me, I've made the mistake in the past, right, where I go off the first reports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't have all the information right away on the employee. And I make assumptions, and I start talking to the hiring client and giving them my thoughts of the reasons behind it, right?
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden you have to go back and say, okay, well, some of that wasn't accurate, right? So it's always best to gather your information, But the main focus is when they're calling you, they're not really beating you up for the investigation. They're trying to find out how the employee is.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah,
have
I think all that's good, and that's sort of my experience as well. Number one thing, that we have to fight with is safety professionals, and this is a big deal. It's because, for whatever reasons, people judge us based on personal injury statistics, TRIR numbers, and we could have a whole big conversation about that, and we don't have time for it. Sometimes the safety people are caught in the middle because they want to get the best treatment for the employee, but they also want to keep it from being a recordable. So I can understand that dynamic too, and maybe that's a topic for another day. But the priority should always be making sure injured workers get the health care they need, and then figuring out what happened. And I think sometimes, because of that dynamic, that work is awarded often based on total recordable injury rates, there is a tendency to feel a lot of pressure to control the information and not be completely honest about what happened in order to not look bad to our customer. And what I found is the truth always comes out. It always comes out. It's better when dealing with OSHA. It's better when dealing with your hiring client to admit mistakes and put corrective actions in place so it never happens again. You want to destroy a relationship, be dishonest. So we're all on the same team. Human beings are involved in industrial work processes that are highly hazardous. This pursuit to zero, is unrealistic. It's really unrealistic. Do I want to get anybody hurt? No. Are we going to get some people hurt? Absolutely. Do we want to make sure that the injuries that they sustain not be serious injuries that could potentially lead to long-term disability or death, or put their normal life functions in jeopardy? Of course not. We don't want those. But people make mistakes. Human beings are involved in this. And there are going to be times where people put their hands where they shouldn't be, or do things that they shouldn't do for a variety of different motivating factors. And we need barriers and defenses that if they fail to follow processes, they make mistakes, that it doesn't result in catastrophe. And that's sort of where safety's headed, I think. For the past 30 years, we've done a good job driving down OSHA recordables. We've done a terrible job of driving down fatalities. We have been plateaued for a long time. In the last 12 years, 60,000 people have died in the United States at work. 60,000 people. So the only way we're going to stop that is to make sure that we're all on the same page. We're being honest with each other. We're laying things out on the table. We understand what happened in an incident. We figure out the corrective actions, and we put them into place. Now, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. Many times what I find is people don't dig deep enough in their investigation. They feel this pressure, whether there's pressure or not coming from the hiring client. They want to know what happened, like Justin said. They want to give answers to their chain of command. And sometimes the incident investigation that they do is superficial. And I think that's more of the norm than the exception. The exception is the deep investigation that looks at all the causal factors. What's your thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it myself, that if you really want to get to the, and I hate the term root cause, right? Because I don't think there's a singular cause to any incident. I think it is a chain of events, a break in the system, right? Several things have to happen, and usually what we find is, like, if you take out one part of that, this guy doesn't get hurt, right? So doing a quick and fast, quick and dirty incident report, you're not getting to the actual causal factors. I mean, it can go range from poor management decisions, poor design of the work, right? Stealing a little James Junkin gold there, right?
That's all right. I stole it from Fred Manuel, so it's good.
But that's what we found is that the more that we allow our workers to interpret, right, the more cases we have of them interpreting policies or procedures wrong. We have to get the gray area. And you won't always get all of the gray area out of there, but you have to get the gray area out. Take those decisions out of their hands so that they can be focused on the work.
Good. I think that's excellent. And this next question, we'll finish up on this because this has been great hearing from him, Mike, and it's really motivating me to think more about some of the things that we do and how we handle our practice. But in the last 3-4 years, really in the last 3, I think, the term psychological safety is being bannered around amongst safety professionals, not just here in the United States, but in the world. And really what we're talking about is creating a culture of acceptability to be able to speak up, whether it's new ideas on how to do new processes, or it's one of the core tenets of occupational safety and health, which is the worker's right to refuse to perform unsafe work. Under the OSH Act, that is their legal right. And a lot of times we call this stop work authority. Everyone has a stop work authority policy generally required by one of the third-party verification systems like Veriforce or ISNetworld or Avetta, that kind of thing. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on this new focus on creating psychological safety in the workplace and how that may be able to do what you just talked about, which is removing some of the gray area and getting our workers to tell us when there are unmitigated hazards.
Yeah, so I feel like there's from a high level overview, right? I feel like there's this disconnect as just in the industry period, we're missing something, right? Why are these guys making choices to not follow a policy or a procedure, right? Why are we unable to utilize stop work the way it should be, right? Our guys they use stop work all day long. You know,
right.
we have this conversation like, hey, just give me a minute, I'll come help you carry that. Well, that's a form of stop work. Hey,
Absolutely.
Go put your hard hat on, or where's your safety glasses at? That's a stop work. But when it comes to involving stop work with hiring clients or other contractors, or even if you're just walking down the street and you see a guy on the top step of a step ladder leaning over, is the normal person going to say, hey, buddy, maybe you shouldn't do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's definitely a psychological, social barrier that we need to figure out how to overcome.
And I don't think it's easily overcome.
Right.
And I don't think most companies have a reprisal system where if you elect to stop work, that they're going to be fired. Most companies that I know of are at least preaching in their training, you have the right to stop the job. They have a policy statement that says you have the right to stop the job. They have legal protections if we do those things in retribution and reprisals. So what is it? And I think sometimes employees put pressure on themselves that is not really pressure on themselves.
I was going to say that
they're afraid. Hey, I don't want to cause the company problems. I'm loyal. I ride for the brand. we've this looks sketchy, but we've never had a problem. I'm new, all these other things. And it's going to take an effort, I think, to break down some of those barriers. And then we have cultural barriers.
Yep.
We have some generational barriers. So it's easy to say to everyone, you have the right and obligation to stop unsafe work. It's a lot harder to get people to exercise that. Now, you said something I've always found very interesting, because always post-incident, when I do incident investigations, people ask me, James, why did the person do what they did? And I try to put myself in that person's shoes, because hindsight's 20/20. It's always easy to make an attribution, a judgment after the fact. It's harder to make judgments when people are engaged in the process. Why do people do things they don't know better? And I think this goes back to something you said, and I've been harping on. Hazards are best controlled when we design the work. We have to be thinking of that in the planning stages and putting barriers and defenses in place. So if something fails, it fails safely. Give you an example. When we lift with a crane, and we're going to have a crane operation, we go out there, we inspect the crane, we make sure we got trained operators, trained riggers, we inspect the rigging apparatus that we're going to use to make sure that we can lift this load, that the crane, the rigging apparatus can handle the dynamic forces of the load calculated with that. So we hope once we've done all that, and we can make a reasonable assumption that all of this is going to work together and we can safely lift the load. But what else do we do? We build a controlled access zone around the lift area, and we keep people out of it. We have people not walk under suspended loads. Why? Because if all that fails, the sun, the moon, and the stars line up against us, and we drop that load, we don't drop it on people.
Right.
So in the sense, the system didn't fail. The system worked. The system worked. Nobody got hurt. Everybody got to go home. And I think the future of safety is probably looking more at the design of the work, at the system of the work, and understanding that human beings are human beings. They're going to make mistakes. And I'm glad to hear that you share that similar philosophy with us. So, Mike, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight and being in part of our Safety Bite, and for really giving us some insight into your views of safety from an operational standpoint.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And we'd like to invite you back anytime to our Safety Bite. Just a quick reminder, this is February, and we're closing out our February Give Back Giveaway Contest. We're giving away the Safety Professionals Handbook, 3rd edition, from the American Society of Safety Professionals. This is an outstanding resource material for any practicing safety professional. This is an over $200 value. Some safety professional is going to be very, very happy to get this particular book. If you're a student and you're looking for reference material, or you're studying for one of your certification exams, this book can help prepare you for whatever task you're undertaking. So how do I enter our contest? Make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, then head over to our YouTube channel, Mariner Gulf, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and you too can be entered to win the American Society of Safety Professionals Handbook, 3rd edition, featuring over 90 articles written by some of the top safety professionals in the world. So come on, join the conversation, hit that like button, hit subscribe. We'll draw from a list of our YouTube subscribers at the end of the month. Justin?
Absolutely. You know, that book right there is a resource that is just insurmountable. It has gives you the opportunity to learn from other people who have already been through those situations, who have already studied and dug deep into those scenarios and looked at it on a scientific level in some ways even. So absolutely, it is a vital tool for every safety professional to have in their office. You know, when you're doing an incident investigation, it's great to have some material and information.
Used it just this past weekend on an instant investigation to go through and check some things to make sure, I had the latest and greatest information and resources. So we put corrective actions in place so it doesn't happen again. Well, thank you for joining us. We hope you like our Safety Bytes and are gaining some valuable information out of it. If you'd like to join the discussion, reach down in that comment section. Let's get to discussing and to sharing. That's how we all get better. So until next time, be safe and have a safe week.